Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today, February 2nd, 2022 is World Read Aloud Day. And our session, Chad and I will be co-facilitating the session. My name is Kristen Patrick, blended learning coach with Noblesville Schools, past president of Indiana State Literacy Association, Indiana's ILA affiliate. And then I consider myself a library activist, so very active with the Carmel Clay Public Library. Chad?
I'm Chad Heck. I am the librarian at Pike High School on the freshman campus. I've been active in Indiana Library Federation, a past board member. I am currently on the Intellectual Freedom Committee. I do a lot of writing and reading in professional ethics and also intellectual property issues in schools and libraries. And I'm excited to have these conversations today. And really what we hope that today is a conversation. So please participate in chat, or if you're so willing and confident, hit that unmute button and join us in the conversation. We want this to be an ongoing conversation. And if we can keep this conversation going, we can certainly have some more of these in the future. So think about that. And if there's something, if you have a question, I am all about answering questions as we go rather than waiting until the end. So if you have something, just type into chat if you want me to call on you, or I won't be offended if you unmute and get in there.
We love it. Super cute graphic. If you want to give a shout out on Twitter today, it's at Keep Indiana Learning, or the hashtag Keep Indiana Learning. That's us. Once again, this is interactive. Please use the chat, and like Chad said, just unmute and jump in the conversation. Okay. To get started, let's agree on a couple points here. One, that the benefits of reading aloud are plentiful and rarely debated. When we think about the field of education where so much is debated, when it is hard to reach agreement on certain things, this is one area, one of the very few areas that is rarely debated, which is the value of reading aloud. And then to add to that, this practice of reading aloud is validated by abundant research, which is good to know. Something that's terrific is that most educators enjoy reading aloud to young people. Granted, some are better or maybe more gifted than others, but most educators enjoy reading aloud. And then we can agree, if you're here this afternoon, this evening, young people need to see themselves within the books that are read to them. That's an agreement. We're not here to debate that. We are assuming that you're joining us this evening, that is one of your core beliefs. So that leads us to a problem of practice, which, referring back, Chad gave us sort of that snapshot of where we are with Indiana politics. And this idea that we know that these read alouds, the ones that lead to like the best conversations, are the ones that celebrate people and places. And sometimes those books that lead to the best conversations are sometimes the same texts that community members are pushing back against. Or the way we say, materials that challenge dominant narratives. So that leads us to our guiding question today, which is, how do we honor this proven literacy practice of reading aloud without sacrificing our most interesting texts? So that's what we're going to grapple with today. Okay, so to get started, our learning intention, or what our goal for this hour is, I think there's two, depending on where you are on your journey with this work. One is that you're going to leave with increased confidence to read aloud texts that could potentially invite community pushback. Remember, potentially, we can never anticipate. We don't know. And sometimes it's books that you would never suspect, can make community members uncomfortable. Knowing some of the people who are going to join us this afternoon, we know that you're doing this work and you're having these hard conversations already. So we hope that for those of you that maybe you're leaving with some talking points, some strategies that you can make part of your coaching toolkit within your professional learning communities. So let's start with this one. I'm going to throw something out there, and that is, it is my opinion, and maybe it's unpopular, but that every read aloud needs to match a standard. Now, with that, the good news is there are a lot of standards that work. Whether it's, you're looking at, student by the end of the school year will be able to read a variety of texts, or on grade level. But also, I think this is a good opportunity to talk about social studies. And this is where we want to hear from you, that there are, at least looking at K-5, there are a number of standards that specifically talk about comparing families, comparing communities, celebrating differences. And so that right there is a standard, to mark down and keep in your pocket, right? Ready to go when explaining these books to, again, administration or a parent.
Kristen, let me ask you a question, because this is a hot button topic right now here in Indiana. Would you include our social emotional standards in this as well?
No,
or do you
I
think
would not,
that
but that's
they
me.
must be academic standards?
That's me. That is my opinion. Yes. I would say, and back to that problem of practice, of where I think one of the strongest arguments for why we would include that text is the fact that it's leading to that higher level thinking, or that rigor, the speaking and listening skills is an argument like that is gonna go far more than a social emotional learning, or the idea that we're doing trauma informed teaching. It's my belief that those arguments aren't going to weigh as much or have as much gravity for those opponents of those texts. So looking at these social studies standards right here, I just picked out 2 from 3rd grade that I can think of quite a few really great read alouds that would match these. So I think a question for our group chat is, all right, social studies K-5, and I don't want this to be the exclusion of secondary, because I know we have some secondary folks with us, but we know that social studies instruction sometimes isn't happening, right? Because with our emphasis on math and literacy. And so sometimes we don't even know, not only are we not teaching it, sometimes we don't even know what those standards are. So we'd love to hear from someone on social studies. Oh, and we have Kelly.
That might be me.
Yes, Kelly, I forgot you're with us.
That's okay. Hi, everybody. I'm a social studies resource teacher, like ELA, social studies integration, I guess, for Howard County Public Schools in Maryland. And I basically build all the lessons for K-5. And with every lesson, I start with the state standards. And given that we have curriculum writers every summer, we try to build really meaningful units using the C3 framework, which Kristen will tell you about. But anyway, I build read alouds into almost every single lesson, where I give different options for lessons, and there's always a read aloud. And here's an example. I got off Twitter the other day. Kristen posted something or reposted a read aloud called Keep the City Going, Brian.
Yeah, Ashley, who's on this session. Yes, she's the one who gave it the shout out. Yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, anyway, I took that book right away and I found a 2nd grade, I found the lesson that fits because it matched the standard. So every read aloud should match a standard. I wrote that down, Kristen, because I thought to myself, do I agree with that? And it's easy to do. It's so easy to do because you can, in ELA standard, and Matt, did you say something about social emotional learning? Would you include those? My feeling on that is that that's woven across your day, even though we have little segments of morning meetings and things like that. But I see that as woven across the day. But for social studies, I think that it is, it's really needed, and it captures even your 5th graders' attention. And e-text, a good book. There's so many sources, but yes, definitely.
Thank you, Kelly. And again, Kelly's joining us from Maryland, and she's a K-5 social studies specialist.
Justin, Justin mentioned in chat that he has a math teacher who regularly reads to his classes. I am a former math teacher, and I used to integrate some picture books into my lessons as well. But Justin, do you have anything, like, how does that math teacher connect these readings with math standards, or is he integrating other literacy standards in the classroom, which I also think is important?
Yes and yes, and I'm sorry, I just got home walking the dog, trying to deal with the curveball of weather and events tonight, so I'm kind of listening
Sure.
and half paying attention here. But yes, so there are times where he'll be able to incorporate a math standard depending on the what he's reading. A lot of times, it's the life skill stuff on the side where there's not a direct standard every day he's reading, but he will pull that in. It just depends on the piece he's reading. But he also, you have those literacy standards that are across departments that at the secondary level, or any area has to have some sort of literacy standards. They're math ones, science ones, social studies, and they all have literacy standards now. And so he'll tie into that sometimes as well. But it's not constant, I will say that, because I know some of the things he reads are simply just teaching them life lessons sort of things.
Justin, thank you. All right, so why don't we go to the next slide? All right, and to be clear, and I want to make this distinction here, that sometimes when we hear standard, that we think, okay, then we must have this, we think of sticky notes and anchor charts and turn and talks and writing prompts. And that doesn't need to happen for every read aloud, right? I know Lester Laminack calls it, right, the movie Read Aloud, where you just read it right through. And so just to be clear, that even though we feel strongly that every read aloud needs to match a standard, know that it doesn't have to involve these literacy strategies. Anything else from the group? And then thank you. I saw Sherry Gick had put something in the chat about, yes, it seems so obvious to match the standards, but the reality is, even us, like veteran folks, it doesn't always happen. So thank you, Sherry, for sharing that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about choosing text, selecting the text that you want to read aloud. So always pre-read, no surprises. You want to be able to anticipate questions from students, and often reading the back matter can help you be better prepared and anticipate those questions. And so this leads to some questions we have for the group, and we hope you'll jump in. And that first one is, have you ever been told it's better to first experience the book with students? Or have you seen colleagues do that? Or have you had an experience where you didn't pre-read and things went badly? Asking for some vulnerability here.
While people are thinking about that, I've been observing some student teachers in some of our English language arts classes, and I can tell that not all of them have completely read the novels that they're currently working in. And it's just apparent to me that they are reading along with the students, and they don't always ask the best questions when they don't do that pre-work too. And I think that questioning is a big part of this as well. It doesn't have to be, as we said on the last slide, sometimes you just want to read the book, but a lot of times we want to, dig deeper and get those kids to think deeper about what they're reading.
I remember John David Anderson, Indiana author, marvelous author. When his book Mrs. Bixby's Last Day came out, and he came to our school, and so some of our teachers chose to read it out loud. And I remember some teachers came to me and they said, "Kristen, you did not tell us, that I'm not going to give away the ending, or that there's certain scenarios, a certain language." And I'm thinking, well, you're reading aloud a book that you didn't, to fourth graders that you hadn't read ahead of time. And again, like Sherry said earlier, it seems obvious, but we know in the frenzy of teaching and the stress, it doesn't always happen.
I guess I have a question about that. I don't know that I was ever told. So before I came to Keep Indiana Learning, I spent 10 years in a 7th grade classroom. I don't think I was ever told to read or not to read my read alouds beforehand. I chose to read aloud to my kids and loved it. and I did it because I loved it. But how would you pick a read aloud if you hadn't read it first? I guess I'm confused by that.
I think a lot of times, just like what Kristen said, that off of someone's recommendation, they chose that book for their classroom, and it may not fit for their classroom. Of course, we have different values in our classrooms. That's become very apparent over the last year, and we want to make sure that we choose books that we're comfortable with ourselves too. One of the things that Kristen and I talked about on this slide, and that she didn't even think about when she wrote these words in about resisting the urge to edit as you read aloud, is in a lot of secondary books that N word comes up, especially when we're dealing with racial matters. And my views on this have changed in the last 10 years, and I am not going to read aloud the N word. It makes my students very uncomfortable having a white man read that N word out loud, and it's just not something that I'm going to do. So maybe I might pick, if it's a passage out of a book that I'm reading, I might pick a passage that's not that, or I might have the kids read that section on their own, and then we talk about it, and we talk about the N word. We've had so many conversations about the N word in the last couple of years in my school and in my classroom, that and it's definitely a conversation that my kids need to have. It's something that they haven't ever felt like they've had a space to talk about before. But I agree with Kristen's point here about editing. If it's something that you feel like you need to edit, that's probably not the thing to read aloud.
And I wrote, I'm always the slides control freak when Chad and I collaborate. So when I created this slide, that bullet point, it was that idea of an elementary where we see it as potty humor, maybe death, or something where they just, like, again, an uncomfortable part in the text, and, teachers choose to skip those pages. And I agree with Chad that if you find yourself skipping significant parts, then, then maybe rethinking that text as a read aloud. Not that excerpts can't be used strategically, but thinking about it as a whole.
I was going to piggyback off of what Ashley said in the chat. And to Marty's question, how does that happen? When you have 10 minutes to fill and you have to do something, or you're going to pull your hair out, or the children are going to pull your own hair out. I have been guilty of not reading it, but I think not as a quick read aloud, I can pull a book off of a shelf and know, okay, it's Jonathan Fenske. I know the author, I know the work. I know that it's just going to be a really silly, quick book. And I feel like I know my students, I know myself as a reader and as a person who chooses books on the daily. So I definitely have done it where I haven't read it before. I try not to make that my practice for my day, but I can see how it does happen. And, it's not what we want for it to happen, but at the same time, you're like, oh my gosh, the buses are late again. I can't handle this. Everybody's going to just sit and we're all going to just listen to this book because, what better way to spend your time, So I've definitely been guilty of it, but I think I also feel myself as having 20 years behind me and being a good judge of what an 8-year-old or what a 5-year-old or what a 9-year-old would find entertaining for those, 10 minutes or 7 minutes or whatever that may be.
Thank you, Steph. Another example, I think, where this might happen, there's time. So yes, I think time is why it happens. Another example would be school districts, like those of us in Hamilton County. I know we have some Hamilton County elementary folks with us, would be teachers' college units of study suggested texts. So a text that comes to mind right now is Rose Blanche, that is on as like a suggested text for 4th or 5th grade units of study. It is a World War II text that has a, if you did not pre-read this, does anyone in this group know what I'm talking about, Rose Blanche? So someone surely has to know this text. You'll have to go find it. But the idea that that is an ending you would not, absolutely not want to read for the first time with kids. But that's not, might not be a time issue. That's a, hey, teacher's college, my curriculum, you know, or my instructional coach gave me this list of texts that match the units. So that would be another example of where we think that we automatically think that that book might not require some pre-reading.
I have some teachers at my school who we just had this conversation saying they don't have time. They don't have time. I don't have time to read that. And I made a joke to them thinking I was funny, but I am not at that. I said, well, if it's, you know, they were saying when I'm asking my kids questions and they're reading novels and I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what to ask them because I haven't read the book. And I said, what do you mean you haven't read the book? Well, I haven't read all the books in my classroom. And one other teacher said, well, especially if it's Diary of a Wimpy Kid or Dog Man. And I chuckled and I was like, oh, I would know because I have read those. And they're like, I don't have time to do that. And it just made me smile and chuckle because it's like, okay, well, that may not be your jam. I know for a fact one person on here does not care for series. And I didn't ask you to read the whole series, but at least if you know who Dogman is, who Petey is, what the premise is, you can ask a ton of questions. You know, it's not rocket science. It's have some handle on it, right? You don't have to do the flipper. It's not required, but they have, you know, I feel like you can take the time to read through some of it. If you know your kids are really into blah, blah, and blah, look at it. Don't say you don't have time. Open it up, crack a book, man.
Thank you, Steph.
Kristen, I'm going to pose another question to you and to the rest of the group about, especially at the secondary level, and I know that many of you, including Kristen, are more primary, but what are our thoughts on trigger warnings when we're dealing with difficult matter, especially when we're reading aloud? And I have an opinion on this, but I'll let others address it first.
Chad, I appreciate you bringing up that conversation. I've had an English teacher come to me very specifically and ask, what is our policy on trigger warnings? And I was like, what? And she said, what's our policy? And I was like, there is no policy. What are you talking about? And so I said, but there are books with trigger warnings, and it's not necessarily a bad idea to be consistent about what we do with books and considering content. However, it is important that we are careful that we're not putting a warning in every book, because next thing you know, especially in this climate, we got warnings up the wazooey about every little thing in this book. This book talks about underpants. Like, really? That's what, like, so I think that it's important. Like as a librarian, I always am knowledgeable about, like, this has some content in it that could be disturbing. So you may want to be sure that you're comfortable with it. And at any point, if you are uncomfortable, you don't have to read it. You can put the book down, you can skip, you can do whatever feels best for you. But just be aware, this book has some content in it. And there are times I'll say, this book has sexual content in it. This book has violence in it. This book, and I will let kids know that, so it's not a surprise. But we don't necessarily have a policy, nor do we have a procedure to put something in a book specifically. So I am interested in others' ideas and thoughts.
Chad, I know you invited me to jump in, but I'm still thinking this one through. I've read quite a bit on the topic, and I'm on an inquiry.
I know. I love that. I know that you love it when I put you on the spot in this, and I don't give you any warning that I'm going to ask. And actually, I didn't think about that question until just now too. I do think one thing that Renee brought up.
Have a thought. I'm sorry, Chad.
Go for it.
I have been Mackin blog, or like Mackin School Library Services Company. They've started a blog, and I've been really impressed with this one blogger. Her name is Kia Heisey. And she did an outstanding post on trigger warnings. And her point of her blog post, I'm sorry, Chad, this had just come to me. Yeah. Her point on her blog post was, that yes, it's an intellectual freedom issue, but, trauma-informed teaching. She said, you know what? we need to talk to the kids about this. This needs to be like, they're who we need to involve in this conversation about, we need to talk to them. Like, do they want trigger warnings? Do they, what would be helpful to them? And I thought, well, that should be the answer. They need to be part of the dialogue.
I like that, Kristen. Actually, that's kind of how I approached the N-word conversations that I had with my students who are predominantly Black in my school, and I wanted to know what their thoughts were on the N-word being in books, and should we ban books? I always make that part of my ban book presentation, is because of course we get a lot of challenges to books because they have the N-word in it. That's, if you look at the ALA statistics, that's one of the things that books are challenged by. In fact, in the Indiana legislature in the last couple of weeks, that conversation has come up repeatedly by Black legislators about books with the N-word being harmful to kids. And I think that having that conversation with kids this year, as you mentioned, is a perfect approach to the power. It also speaks to the power of books too. Like books are powerful. Those things in it can actually like cause kids to react or think differently. And of course, that's the benefit of books too. Did you want to say something?
It's in the chat, the blog post I was referring to.
Renee brought up something that I also wanted to talk a little bit more about, or she alluded to something. One thing that I want to make clear with this conversation, and both of these conversations are good conversations to have, but there is a difference between having books to read aloud and having books where students have choice to read those books. And the standard of selection is very different for those things. One is a captive audience, and one is an adventure that you choose to take yourself on. So I think that's something to think about and Kristen and I have talked about this at great length of where we draw that line, and it's very difficult to draw that line of what that difference is, and we're going to get to that more here in a little bit. But we do act in loco parentis as teachers when we're doing read alouds. We do not act in loco parentis when students are self-selecting materials.
Chad and Kristen, Joanne had her hand raised, so if you wanted to.
Joanne, unmute.
Oh, I was trying to catch up and type it, but so I hadn't really thought a lot about trigger warnings as far as like whole class read alouds. And I thought Renee had a really good point about like sometimes there's also danger in over labeling things. And I was trying to think about, when I taught middle school English, and, if I would have considered personally any of those texts to have a trigger, but then that led me to thinking about how what is a trigger for one person might not be for somebody else. And so now I'm just thinking, so basically y'all took me down a rabbit hole of thoughts. And now I'm just thinking, maybe the answer is to, at least for me, would be to just have an open conversation with the class. Like, hey, this is the book we're getting into. If you have any concerns or something you want to talk about, and just kind of having, that open door sort of policy.
Joanne, thank you. I appreciate that. Think aloud. Looks like we're good on time. So I'll go ahead and ask that last sort of discussion prompt. How do you handle books that kids bring home from home to share with their class? Is anyone willing to unmute?
I would talk to them individually about the book. Oh, tell me about it. I would do a one-on-one first and get some information and browse through it with that one child. I would not go right to the whole class though.
Yeah, I don't think I'd do it cold either, Kelly.
But I would definitely, number one, any child that brings in a book from home, you want to reinforce that. And if it's something uncomfortable or awkward, we have skills. We could do this. You just have to, every situation's different. But I think let them own that conversation and ask why they brought it in. And just listening is okay.
Very wise advice. Thank you, Kelly.
I've often asked what their favorite part was in that conversation of, oh, you brought this. Why did you bring this? Well, we may not have time to read it today, but will you show me your favorite part of the book? Maybe we can just share that part.
Great advice, Steph.
I love that advice, Kelly and Stephanie, both of those. And I think it goes back also to what Kristen said. If the student is pressing on maybe sharing it with the class, like Kristen, you said, make sure your read alouds are linked to a standard so that you can always fall back on that when you're having a conversation too and thinking about those things.
Oh, Leslie, so always great to hear from you. All right, let's go ahead. Well, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so publishing your read aloud list. This is something in this idea of demonstrating transparency to your community, your families, your administration. I'm speaking, more from a K-5 perspective right now, but this is huge. Publishing your read aloud list. Now, I will admit, I'm very thankful for my examples, but I will tell you, they were hard to find. So a couple thoughts here. One, Ashley Lansdale, who joined us, she's on our session this evening. She does a beautiful Wakelet. She's used Padlet in the past. This year she's using Wakelet. It's her pinned tweet. So if you go to @Mrs. Lansdale, it's her pinned tweet, open it up. Every time she does a read aloud, she adds it to the list. Families, shares it with families. So I think that's beautiful for not a lot of reasons beyond transparency, but the idea that if they wanted to go order it from their bookseller, or if they wanted to go check it out from the library, they have that list.
Kristen,
Peter,
I'll ask you,
yeah.
Can I ask you a question on that? Like, what are your thoughts about this transparency inviting controversy?
I think it says you stand by your list. I think you reduce the opportunities for controversy by the fact that you're publishing it and you're sharing it. It says that you have a stance, that you stand by your decisions, and shows that you have nothing to hide. And so I think if anything, you're avoiding controversy by publishing that list.
And inviting conversation too. I think that if you're being transparent, a parent is much more likely to contact you directly than to show up at a school board meeting or go above you. Yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the reactions here in Indiana when some parent groups were training their members on how to search our library collections, one of the responses for many of our libraries around the state was to no longer allow those collections to be made public. They shut it down to where you had to have a school login in order to access the catalog. And I really disagree with that approach. We need to stand by what we do. And the main complaint about these laws that are currently being proposed is that schools and teachers are not being transparent in what they do. So we need to be radically transparent and not be ashamed of what we do or afraid. It also goes back to how we started. We can't be afraid right now.
I know that when, do you want me to add?
Yeah, Debbie, yes, we're excited. Debbie, great to see you.
I know that when I was in the library and I would do read alouds, our kindergarten classroom teachers in their newsletter every single week would specifically write in the newsletter what story I was reading that week. So that was in addition to what they were reading or studying or whatever, they would include what story I read to the class. And I know that I even had parents at times when they saw me tell me that their child was telling them all about what I had read that week. So I think that that's a good thing to do.
Newsletters. Thank you, Debbie, for reminding us about not only publishing it to your classroom, publish it to the whole school. I want to make another point on this slide. This consider read aloud volume. This is important that you have this record, because if you're having pushback on what we might call like a gender affirming title, that maybe a parent takes issue with, they don't like that you've read aloud there's any number of them, Jacob's New Dress or Sparkle Boy, or, some what we call gender affirming titles. Then you can come back and say, well, okay, I hear what you're saying. These are all the books we've read aloud. So, at this point, we've hit 80, 90, 100, 110 books. And so you're talking about one book, which, I think a lot of us on this call would say is not enough, right? But when you think about percentages and numbers, we're talking about one book, and a lot of read alouds. And so that when you do read aloud a book that is more, gender inclusive, it's not such an event. Looks like Joanne put Ashley's Wakelet in the chat. So that's awesome. Please open it up. Ashley has marvelous taste in books. So leave with some ideas. But Nikki, I know you put in the chat, I don't know if you're still with us, but as a parent, are you able to unmute and talk about your parent perspective? She might have stepped away for a moment, but I know I saw Nikki in the chat and said just from a parent that she would love to be able to see a list of what's being read aloud.
Well, Kristen, I'm going to step in here. It's Ashley to say thank you for using my example because it really is pure joy. This wakelet that I do, and I, gosh, everything seems so hectic now. Every once in a while, I'm like, I didn't put my book on there for today or my books or whatever. But what I do put, as Debbie said with the newsletter, at the end of every email I send my parents weekly, I say, check out these books that we've been reading, and I list there for them, like if you're at the library and you want to direct your kid to something, you can read one of these books again. They'd be so excited to have it at home too, right? And if you need to buy a gift for somebody in this age group, if I try and nudge them a little, and it just is a lot of joy, not only for me to see it, but also to be able to share it. And even if only one or two parents looks at it or uses it. And then usually around the end of the year, what I've done the past couple of years is have my kids, because my kids are not really involved with this. They teach kindergarten, but put up the QR code and they can scan it, look at all the books we read. And then, they'll say, oh, I like this, I like this. So it's really just kind of a nice way to wrap up what we've done in kindergarten. And I hope it gives some talking points to some parents. That's my hope. But, you just keep doing it, and I'm motivated to do it, so it works. And maybe I'll start adding the standard that it covers in my wakelet. What do you think about that?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Ashley. I'm on an iPad right now, so I don't know, Marty, if you have the ability to open that Seesaw Journal link and put it in the chat. But this is really interesting. This is a second grade teacher in my school district, Noblesville, where the student has an ongoing slides for all of their books they read aloud, and then they add little emojis for sort of emoji rating. So if you just want to advance through a couple slides, but I thought this was a neat use of emojis and just sharing that, creating that the reading life, that record. I thought that was really neat. All right, so Seesaw, a lot of us are using at the K-3 level. Another, more opportunities to be sharing with our families what we're reading in the classroom. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, freedom not to read aloud. So accepting the idea that not all inclusive texts work well as read alouds. Just looking at our group who's joined us this evening, I know we have a lot of years of experience among us, and we know that we're looking at, cadence, some length of text, reliance on artwork, level of front loading requires. There's a lot of factors we're looking at. So what are some examples of a book that you love? Maybe you've decided that doesn't make sense for read aloud, or if anyone's willing to be brave or vulnerable and share any topics you would avoid when choosing read alouds. And I can go first. I'm hoping someone else will jump in. So I document my read aloud. I've started this within the last year too, adding picture books to my Goodreads. I hadn't always done picture books on Goodreads, and now I do picture books on Goodreads. And so through that, I've committed to reading more picture books. And I read one recently Portraits of Power. And it's a beautiful book. It's about a young artist, and I should have looked it up before we started tonight, who does portraits of, people who've inspired him. And it's a beautiful book. It's his artwork of prominent figures. And I ultimately decided that, yes, this is a beautiful book, but it's a book that I wouldn't choose to share with kids for two reasons. One, there's a little vignette, little like bio under each portrait. And I thought the way they were written was kind of awkward, that I could just sort of hear myself saying, this wouldn't be a smooth, engaging read aloud, for one. And two, I would not choose to read that book because he highlights so many active politicians or activists or people who are in the political arena right now. I keep using the word politics, which I know is a loaded word, but I would hesitate to talk or have read alouds where people who are actively campaigning or actively on the scene right now. That is one area where I would hesitate to read aloud. So I'm opening it up for the group. Is there anything that would give you pause when you read aloud?
I have some questions for you, Kristen, about your response. But what about really hot button issues that are addressed by some prominent politicians or like Black Lives Matter? We could use that as an example. Would you do a read aloud on something that's related to Black Lives Matter or heavily racial? Like, does that fit your criteria?
I would. I think what feels icky to me, and maybe this is my bias, is just about politics, is the idea that these are people who are campaigning, they're trying to get voters, to me,
Okay,
that's sort
I
of
see the difference now.
side
Yeah.
of politics. I don't want to bring that into the classroom.
Kristen, I can't think of an example of a book that is what you're relating to with the political viewpoint. Can you give an example of a book?
The one I was talking about is called Portraits of Power, where he profiled like Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. So they're like little mini bios on them.
Okay, yeah, okay, I gotcha. I mean, for me, there's a new picture book, the 1619 Project, Born on the Water, and we teach a 4th grade unit, enslavement, etc., triangular trade. It's part of social studies. So after going to NCTE and hearing the authors of the regular, the massive book that's been produced, I read the picture book and I thought, wow, this fits perfectly into our 4th grade social studies standards, like specifically exactly one lesson. And then I gave it to my boss, my counterpart, we're a 2-team K-5. And she was like, I don't know. We have to have this approved by the Social Studies Advisory Board. So everything, like, it would be a perfect read aloud. And it's written poetry, etc. But Matt, they refer to the white people in the book. And when I first read it, I was uncomfortable being called, and the white people did this, and the white people did that. It did not feel right. But with your N-word conversation earlier, I think that's part of where we all have to learn to teach this comfortably, confidently, being well-informed educators. And I think my book is going to be approved by the advisory board because it's factual based on other sources that we've done a lot of sourcing based on that book. And but I think trainings and workshops for educators, when you have sensitive topics like this and you want to do a read aloud, it has to be really thoughtful. So it's definitely not a cold read, and it's definitely read with intention, and you put post-it notes in that book. You mark, even a kindergarten book, you could put post-its now. This is a stopping point because this is where I want attention. I want to ask a question here. So, I mean, my example, Kristen, is not political, but it's definitely racial and it's controversial. It goes with the critical race theory. Why talk about, enslaved people in the way we do, but I'm going by standards in Maryland, that is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just bringing that up. I don't know if it was completely aligned, but.
No, perfect example. And what I wish for that book is I wish it was a little bigger, so that if you were sharing it with a group, that they could admire the artwork and the words. I was surprised how little it is.
I know. It is. You would have to really project that. I agree. And because it's beautiful. It's beautiful artwork.
Beautiful
And
book.
it goes from dark to, bright to dark. It's like the Wizard of Oz, the art changes dramatically,
So thoughtful.
Kristen, I was just thinking about a book that I do read aloud, but there has been a lot of pressure to censor this book. And it's because the book is problematic that people don't want it in libraries or schools. And this particular book that I read aloud to students is a biography of Harriet Tubman that is problematic. It has this happy slave narrative in it. And the publisher has actually recalled the book after a lot of this outcry, but I have the old copy and I still read it to the students because I think they need to understand why it's problematic. And I think those are conversations that we don't have enough with our students. And I don't come right out and say it's problematic. Actually, maybe I do. I come out and say, in my opinion, this is problematic. And we have a conversation. And I have, when I was co-teaching with a Black teacher, she didn't think it was problematic. And we had a conversation and we modeled having that conversation with our students and allowed people to come to their own conclusions. Whereas I thought this book was problematic because they referred to Harriet Tubman's happy childhood and slavery, and the Black teacher didn't agree with me. She thought that it's very possible Harriet Tubman did have a happy childhood in slavery, and we did this point counterpoint debate, and I think that we need to model those kinds of conversations with our kids so that they can see that it's okay to talk about racial issues. It's okay for a white man and a Black woman to talk about racial issues together, and I think that in secondary in particular, like that's important for us to do. We need to talk about why some people don't want to read these texts or have these books in the library, and let those kids come to their own conclusions.
Great example.
Kristen, I'm trying to think of titles that I haven't read, but I'm still thinking of them. But something that I do, like there are so many books that I make sure of a point that I do read them throughout the year and I do expose students to them. For example, like books that are Native authors, Native illustrators. It's so important, and it's my goal constantly to get students exposed to these to these books and just the contemporariness of it. And every single time I have every year, every class, the students say, wait, what, Mrs. C? There are still Native Americans. And it's like, oh my goodness. So it's like, that is like my passion, my goal, like to just read as many of those. So yeah, I'm not sure about which ones I wouldn't read, still thinking about that, but that is definitely a huge goal of mine every year, to try to read as many contemporary books around Native American culture and the different indigenous groups.
But then I think like a problem for you with them would be like if a team was saying, hey, we're going to read these Thanksgiving books, right? We're all going to do these Thanksgiving activities. How do you gracefully say, no, thanks, right?
Yes.
Or pass on.
Very much so. And actually, I have had that conversation before, and teachers have said, hey, how would you do that? And I say it kind of like, my opinion, kind of reply, I say, well, I'm not going to teach about the first Thanksgiving because that truth might be a little too intense and heavy for these kindergartners. This is, if I were, we might be crying and because it's trauma and it's genocide. So yeah, we're not doing that. But these are ones that I would read instead. Like, let's focus on gratitude year round, and let's talk about the true history throughout the year round, and not just, hey, this is what happened at the first Thanksgiving, because we have the white perspective and that's inground into us, right? Like, we need to get the Native perspective and all year round. and kind of like the true stories from their perspective and not the white perspective. So sorry, this was a big,
No,
topic. I know there's just so many levels of it.
and no, I think, and because I don't think we've touched upon that yet this evening, this idea of, so I know Emily's joining us. She was in a second grade classroom, and last couple of years she's been an EL teacher. So, she's looking across grade levels here. At what point do you introduce some of this complex topic, the hard history, right? And putting the thought into that maybe it isn't kindergarten. Great example.
Let's move to the next slide, and we're almost out of time, and we just want to briefly touch on how to handle parent pushback. And one piece of advice that Kristen has always given is schedule a actual conversation, resist the temptation to bang something out in an email. Or
to have the conversation, the car rider line, the hallway.
Right.
Don't do it. No,
Right.
they get fired up about this. Do not do impromptu meetings. Do not.
And face-to-face, of course, is always better. It's difficult in a pandemic sometimes, but really establishing a personal connection can really de-escalate a lot of these things much of the time. Most of the challenges that I've had, actually every challenge I've ever had, I've been able to de-escalate before it became a formal challenge. So just having those conversations is really important. And then to come prepared, that's the other big piece of this. And we wrote this guide. You can find that in the link there that will walk you through that process.
And this slide right here, we felt it was important, but it wasn't necessarily the heart of today's session. So yeah, if Marty wouldn't mind putting that link in the chat. But this idea also that fourth bullet, referring back to Meet the Teacher, back to school materials, just how essential it is to lay that groundwork at the beginning of the year. Whether it's in your back to school PowerPoint, your brochure, your handout, your Meet the Teacher materials, that in this classroom, we read inclusive text. In this classroom, but bullying will not be tolerated. That you have this documentation that you can refer back to. A book that did a really nice job talking about that is Unpack Your Impact with Naomi O'Brien and Lanisha Tabb, who is an Indianapolis teacher or native educator. They address this in the last chapter of their book, the idea that you have to make it clear that this is what your learning space, your classroom, your library is all about from the very beginning of the school year. All right. So we're almost at 5:30. Something else to keep in mind, we cannot let those families who are loud or those what you might perceive as complainers, it can't be one group that you're tailoring all your choices to, that you're avoiding conflict. Just keep in mind, families can be just as loud and persistent in support of LGBTQ inclusive books as families who oppose them. So another takeaway. Lindsay Walters, I don't know, she said she was having internet issues, so I don't know if she's still with us now, but she heads up the Read Aloud's Too Good to Miss committee, which is sponsored by the Indiana Library Federation. Go on their website, look at their list. These lists, oh, Lindsay's here. Lindsay, do you want to jump in and share anything about your lists?
Sure. I don't know how good I can come through, and I'm sick, so I apologize. My voice is terrible as well. It's snowing and I'm sick. It's fine. Yes, please check out the Indiana Read Aloud list. Stephanie Dale's on our committee this year too, and she is hilarious. I adore her. So check it out. We work really hard. Like everything that you and Chad have talked about tonight are things that we grapple with as we're putting together these Read Aloud lists, because we do want to make sure that like teachers can or librarians can take these lists and hopefully they pre-read the book. But if they don't, because we know some people might not, hopefully they've been well vetted by the people on our committee to be something you can take and read aloud. But we work really hard to make sure it's inclusive, that it represents everyone who we have walk through our school doors, through our library doors. All of our patrons deserve to have a place at the table and a book on our list.
Oh, Lindsay, thank you. We're feeling poorly with bad Wi-Fi, so thank you. We appreciate you jumped in. And with Lindsay and Steph on the committee, we know that just the upcoming list is going to be extra awesome. Indiana State Literacy Association, like I said, past president, I can't miss an opportunity to give it a shout out. We've been in Indiana for 57 years, hard to believe. And then Kelly is joining us from Maryland, and she is the president of Maryland's ILA affiliate. Kelly, so glad you joined us.
Thank you for having me. This was great. Nice to meet all of you.
Thank you, Kelly. And then Indiana Council of Teachers of English. And they too are putting out great programming and ways to continue the conversation and to help us stay on top of literature, right? It's a moving target. So many great books coming out all the time. And all three of these organizations can help us with that work. Oh, and Rachel too is a past president of Indiana State Literacy Association. Rachel, we're glad you joined us.
Thanks. It was wonderful listening to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, please, let's keep this conversation going, and keep Indiana Learning for making this happen today. And if there are other topics that we need to address, Lena Darnay is really wanting to keep these conversations going, and we're happy that you came, and we're happy to continue to talk about these complicated issues.
We are so thankful for both of you today, your knowledge and your experiences and facilitating this discussion. I added books to my list of things I need to read. So thank you so much. We did record this. It'll be on our YouTube channel soon. So if someone couldn't make it, we will get this out there for you to see. So Kristen, Chad, you have anything else before we go?
I don't. Thank you, Marty, for everything. You've been great.
Yeah, thank you for everyone who put links in the chat. That's fantastic, and we appreciate. We know it. You have to be brave to unmute, right, in a group Zoom. So thank you for all of you who shared, who came tonight. This is fun for us. So thank you.
And when I post it to YouTube, I'll compile all these links and all the books and put them in the show description, so you'll be able to find them nice and easy. So Chad and Kristen, thank you so much. Thank you everyone who joined. Yes, let me put the link in the chat again for PGP points. Just give me a second to get back there. Thank you, Lena, for the reminder. So give me just a second. And it's a quick survey, and there you go, for you to give us some feedback on the session and get you a PGP certificate. So I don't know what the roads look like at your house, but they're very sleek covered here. So be safe if you still have to travel tonight. And to thank all of you for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Marty.
Bye-bye.